Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 15 of Entrepreneur Gains, where I interview Y Combinator alumni. On today's show, I have Praful Mathur, who went through YC with his company Shotput, developing AI and robotics to automate e-commerce supply chains completely. His first startup was putting advertising in cabs and competing against a giant like Verifone, and ended up beating them to market just by pure hard work. Praful is a serial entrepreneur and has started many startups that have gone through Techstars and Y Combinator and raised millions of dollars of VC funding. He is an early adopter and a big thinker, and I love how his brain works. This is one of my favorite episodes and is of pure value. I hope you guys like it. Hey, Praful, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is an awesome podcast.
Thanks, man. Looking forward to chatting with you a lot. I want to know first, just for the viewers, like what was your YC company and anything you can share about the company?
Yeah, so the company we got into with YC was a company called Shotput, and what our goal was is to create a AWS for logistics. And it sounds funny because Amazon owns AWS and it's the best in logistics. But if you think about like deconstructing everything it takes to taking a product from manufacturing to e-commerce sale and then to the person's door, we had the saying it's like from factory floor to customer door. We would kind of deconstruct that and create an API around it. And the ultimate goal was to create this kind of experience, give you an API, and just turn logistics into a utility. And Stripe has done this with payments, and AWS has done this with computing infrastructure. And Amazon is doing this with logistics, but it's not as easy to use. And we found out why. There's just 100 different things that can go wrong with atoms, and yeah, I can go into like what are the mistakes we made, but essentially like that was the goal of the company.
Awesome. Okay. And so before we get into that, I kind of want to start with like your story before you even got to YC. Like like how were you always entrepreneurial when you were in school or university, or like how did your first startup happen?
Yeah, so it's funny. I wanted to just write software forever. And so I was talking to my parents. My dad's engineer, and that's why I got into software, is because I looked up to him and I just wanted to do what he did. And then I started looking up the richest people in the world, and they all have to be software engineers, like Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, et cetera. And so I was like, okay, not only is this something I love doing, but I can make a career out of this. And I started talking to my dad, like, I just love this. And he kind of mentioned, like, you never want to work for somebody. You always want to have the opportunity to build something of your own because that's the only way to build wealth. And I think he was kind of coming from a perspective because he wanted to build a company his whole life, but he was also, I think, at that point in the early 90s, mid to late 90s as well, was just getting burnt out from the fact that, he was making a reasonable amount of money, but at that time, software engineering was this kind of like grunt work that you were put into the back office and you were asked to like do whatever the business people did. But that kind of got me on this path. And then any family party we went to, all the uncles or all our family friends were all like, hey, you should always start your own company, never work for the man. And it got stuck in my head around that time.
I love it. And so you went to college for like learning software, basically.
Yeah, I did computer science. So at the end
Right.
of the day, I really just wanted to write software. Like that was all I wanted to do. And then I was told if you really want to write incredible software, you have to do it for yourself because everyone will always give you some code to write or some spec to write, and it'll always be some like weird business jargon that doesn't make sense to anybody. And all I got into it for was like write software that's just like incredibly interesting and people will use. So.
Love it. And then you started your first startup, which was, I think, I heard you say that you tried for a year and you guys were just like kind of shooting the shit and you were like, something will kind of come about, uh, but then you ended up getting into your first startup through an opportunity that came along.
So I was in northeastern in Boston, and around that time, Paul Graham had a talk at Harvard, and it was like a small group. It was just maybe like 20 people total, and I just happened to show up. And he was talking about how he created this uh, group called, or this project at the time. He didn't even have a name for it. It was just like, oh, this is Y Combinator. It's like based on this like computing, which is based on a fixed point combinator, if you know what computer science. But anyway, and he was talking about building this like a language based on Lisp, and in our school we have something called Racket now, and it's built by this guy named Matthias Feliz. Anyway, so he's going on and on about this stuff and how he's going to invest in people, and you should apply. So I applied that night. I just had some like random company I wanted to build using, basically like a API marketplace, and he liked it. So then he invited me to interview. I came in a suit because on the East Coast, you always dress up before you go anywhere. Sam Altman made fun of me when I walked into the room. Paul Graham also made fun of me. Jessica was the only one who was nice to me, and I remember that. And I just remember in the middle of the interview, Paul Graham just turned to me and said, honestly, we're not going to fund you. Like, you're not really a technical person. You're just a business person. And I'm like, no, wait, I do computer science. I didn't know that dressing up in a suit. And so I kind of got rejected that way. My co-founder, who I ended up working with, Sumant, he had gotten rejected from a girl. And so we both had something to prove. And so that summer we got together. Actually, it was out of the blue. He called me. He's like, hey, what are you doing for this summer break? And I was like, I don't know, nothing, like an internship. And he's like, okay, I'm doing an internship too. Let's like figure something out, because you wanted to build a business. I wanted to build a business. We've always had this idea. Let's just do something. We iterated a lot. And then I think we were just like going from idea to idea. And then at the end of the day, we was just getting to a point where like we're both kind of figuring out, what are we doing? Like, summer break is coming up again. We're going into our sophomore year. Like, what are we doing? And that's when we started to talk about the actual company we ended up building. So
I have a question before we get to that. What year was this when PG was going to like different campuses and talking about YC and stuff like that?
I don't think he went to different campuses. I think he just went to Harvard.
Okay.
And it was like, and the only way I found out was that there's other people in computer science that in Northeastern that were also planning to go. And then I thought I had missed everybody. So I just took a cab all the way there, and I spent all this money. And then none of my friends were there, because they turned out, they were just like, oh, it's just like some random thing. We didn't want to go. And then I was the only one that showed up.
Wow.
From Northeastern. And it was like, honestly, it was 2007. At that time, no one cared about startups.
Yep.
No one cared about any of this stuff. And Paul Graham was just some guy. He wasn't a billionaire like he is today. Like, there was no Airbnb or DoorDash. It was just a bunch of, I think that was a year that Dropbox went into.
Yep. So. Makes sense. Wow, that's so crazy. I mean, talking about luck, or like what you call like taking the opportunity that you ended up just going and seeing him, that probably like, shaped you to think, or you and your partner to think more about, what exists out there, right? Like comparing to like a lot of your friends who didn't go. It's so interesting to think about that you took that chance and decided to go ahead and just watch that talk.
Yeah, after he spoke, I ended up going back and reading his essays, because that's where my friends had found him. And then I realized, like, wow, this guy's really interesting. And actually, during the interview when he rejected me, I kind of had brought a quote from his essay, and he paused, considered it, and then still said, yeah, we're still going to reject you. And so it was an interesting encounter. So yeah.
I love that, man. So how did the advertising company happened after? Like, what happened right after that?
Yeah, so what I told Sumant was like, hey, look, like, we're going from like these different, so the idea we first started with was like to do something like really interesting with video detection of like clothing. And at that time, that was, the way I found out about it is I was going through MPEG-4 specifications, because I don't know, that's what I wanted to do. And I found this like interesting thing about like how in the MPEG-4 thing, they had this concept of objects, and no one really uses it even to this day, but you could basically add and tag objects or attribute objects, and then you could do stuff with it. Anyway, that idea turned out to be like incredibly technically painful. But what that allowed us to do is get into this habit of what YC talks about, is talking to your customers. So any idea we had, we talk to customers, call them, find out, validate. And so like I'd have an internship, and I would be like the "Can you hear me now" guy. Like I would take the Verizon car and like go around, and I would try to like figure out where a signal was. But on the same hand, I would have my like Bluetooth headset. I was on a phone call on my cell phone, calling up like Macy's or J.C. Penney or whatever. But that got us into this like habit of constantly talking to customers to validate our decisions or ideas. And so there was that idea. There was like another idea of a stock market for employees. And anyway, we're talking to lots and lots of customers. And eventually we land on this idea with this where Suman was in class. He was listening to people talk about advertising models. He found out about a cab company in Boston. He'd called a bunch of cab companies in San Francisco, Chicago, and Boston, and I didn't know about this. There was one in Brookline that had about 30 cabs, and they're like, hey, we're ready. We would like to do this with you over the summer. He flew out. His sister had paid for his flight. He stayed at my apartment while we were there. And then we went to this place. He was in his, blazer and shirt. And yeah, I don't know, I was an engineer, so I had just like a nice shirt and khakis or whatever. We walked into this thing where it was a really like old school, like SD card player you have to plug into the wall outlet, and we had this like we had music. Suma was like, hey, just buy this thing. I was working at the time because at a co-op, because Northeastern allows you to do that. So I had money to invest in this thing, and so I bought this little SD card player, and I put like Nelly's music video. I put some advertisement, and I put a actual like movie on there. And someone's like, "What is this?" But anyway, we went to the guy. He's like, "I love this. This is awesome." But there were challenges. One, you can't have this like thing plug into a wall outlet in a car. It was also not like we shook it a little bit, the whole thing stopped. So the cab owner just told us like, hey, look, like it seems like you guys are cool kids. I like what you're doing. If I can make some money on this, I'd love to try this out. And that started our entire process of building this company because we validated it. But right after that, we went to all these local businesses, restaurants, bars, etc., and we just went to each one. So we went from this cab company straight to local businesses, asked them if they would advertise, and 100% of them said no. So we had gotten good news, the fact that we were able to actually build something in a cab. We got bad news because all of the people we talked to said no. And on the, I remember on the train ride back home on the BART, or not BART, but whatever it is in Boston, sorry, MBTA, we were going back and someone's like, I don't think this is gonna work. And I was like, dude, we have to do something. And the fact that we got approval is good news because these local businesses aren't going to advertise. We can always find advertising anywhere else. And the way I knew that is Google was getting advertisements online and people thought that wouldn't work. I was like, if you could do digital out of home, that's not what we called it, but it was like, if you could do out of like a cab, people will pay for it. If they pay for vertical, you'll pay for it inside the cab. So.
I love that. And then what happened right after that? How did you guys decided, okay, we're going to do this, and then what happened?
So Suma had summer break. I was still doing co-op. So he flew to Boston. All of my roommates went home for the holidays, for the summer holidays, and we broke into one of my roommates' apartments. I mean, not my apartment, like his actual room. Suman stayed there for the summer, and then I ended up finding. So we then had to like start doing the business for real. Once we realized like Brookline is a very small offshoot city of Boston, Suman went to the city of Boston regulators directly. We talked to them and asked them, hey, this is the idea. There's a group in New York that does this. They make a lot of money. Would you like to bring this to Boston? And they turned to him and said, funny you say that. We're actually just in the process of regulating this in the next week. Would you like to be one of the companies that presents? And he said, yeah, let's do it. He's like, okay, for you to do that, you need to get 3 cab companies to okay you before you come. I'm like, yeah, easy. Turns out there's only 4 or 5 cab companies, and so we needed a majority of them to say yes to this like no name company. But yeah, so that was like but that's like where we ended up having to work out of. And it turns out these cab companies are incredibly corrupt, incredibly backwards, incredibly they're not tech savvy at all, and they will lie, cheat, and steal any amount of money they can. And so in the beginning, we were very naive, but we very quickly realized that we can sort of exploit their greed in a way to get approval.
Very interesting. Makes sense. I mean, that's why Uber is not a lot of cities, right? Where there's so much corruption going on behind the scenes, where they don't want to lose the market share. So it makes complete sense. But you used it to your advantage, though. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I have a lot of opinions on what Uber had to do to get to their market positioning. But what I can say is, no cab company in the world is just like um, they're not good people. Like I can just say that. Like in the cab industry in Boston, by the time we'd gone through the whole understanding, like everyone from the Russian mafia to drug dealers to large interests are all have their um, hand in the cab industry at one point or the other, and that all started to like get reduced as the credit card machines came in. But up until like Uber started to go into the marketplace, I mean, one of the largest medallion owners in Boston was this guy named Eddie Tatunjan. He was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, one of the most powerful people in Boston politics. He's now worth nothing. He's in debt because of Uber. But yeah, this guy was so powerful. Like he would walk into rooms and like people would change the rules for him. And so yeah,
Wow.
incredibly corrupt dude. Like the number of like stories that we heard about this guy. I mean, this guy just ran a. He's not a great person. So yeah.
Wow. See, that's actually interesting, and I wonder off topic, but I'm just wonder because we were just chatting about this the other day as well. So I was in Mexico last year, and there was Uber there when I was there for like a tiny bit, and then we are chatting about it that there's no Uber in Mexico right now as well because cartel, their hands are when Uber comes into play, then the cash doesn't flow and it doesn't go through, the cartel. I wonder like why is it that they're always why is such a why is there so much corruption in this industry? Why do people like or why do like mafia groups or whatever like they're so much into cab companies or cab yeah.
So I'll give you like a slight history into the cab industry, and some of this will be wrong, but it's intentionally wrong just to make the story easier to digest. But
Yeah.
essentially, what happened is that like the cab industry has always been a cash machine, right? I mean, you paid in cash, and you were just able to like keep this cash machine running. Now, the thing with any kind of cash generating business is it's very easy to launder money. And so up until taxi cabs had taxi meters, the mafia would use this as a way to show like, hey, like they made a couple $1 million in drug money. They could take that and launder it through the cab industry, and so they would spike their profits a little bit every year. And then in the years that were really bad, they would have other businesses they could launder through. But like it was a very good way to launder money. When the meters came into play, then it was a lot easier to audit this. So in the beginning, what happened is the meters were there for passenger trust, but then in the background they were able to tweak the meters so that way
Yep.
they could still show a profit.
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
Over time, the meters got more and more the more and more complex. And the other thing is that you can't run a conspiracy with hundreds of drivers, and like the drivers were like, well, because then like what ended up happening is that the meter versus the cab, like the driver's salary started to not match up. So the IRS started to wonder like what the hell is going on. So the cab industry started getting out of the actual day-to-day transactional volume of the money. Where they started to take their money from was charging the driver for the medallion rate and for the car rate. But what that did is it started to just bleed the drivers dry, and it became a large revenue source for the cab industry. And so the medallion price is actually something, and so the medallion prices you might have heard have been anywhere from like a couple $100,000 to
Yep.
millions of dollars,
Yep.
depending on the city you're in. The reason for that is that it's in a liquid market. So the price of a medallion is based on the last transaction that occurred. There's only one or two transactions at that level at any given time. And so what ended up happening is that the these kinds of transactions were actually used as a way to even clean money even further, right? Because you have two, cartel groups or two mafia groups. They can have ways of transacting money between accounts, and they can clean it by showing that there's this asset sale. Now, the IRS is actually fairly smart, so they can catch on to these things. You can only do that once or twice before it starts to get weird. So then, once the mafia or the cartels or whoever started to realize that this is not a good scheme anymore, they started to completely divest. And so that's when you started to see larger amounts of sales of medallions directly to drivers at incredibly large rates. Those are like lease to own. Like it kind of bankrupted a lot of people because you still had to pay the medallion rate even though there wasn't any rides. It could have happened for any number of reasons. A pandemic. I mean, this is unique this year, but like it could have happened for sudden snowstorm that no one expected, or people are just not comfortable going out. There's no celebration, whatever. And so there are times where, like, 2008, 2009 recession, lots of people like lost a lot of money, and these drivers were still paying medallions on these long-term lease contracts. And so when Uber came out, we were actually from one of, like, David Cohen was one of the first few investors there. We were in Techstars at this time. He had told us, like, I'll fund you to build this company. He's like, Uber, I invested in them, but like they're all just partying all day. Like, why don't you guys just do it? You're from the cab industry. You'll know how to build this. But at the time, Uber was in black cars. We started to investigate the black car market and the taxi market. And even if you build a dispatch service for the entire market, your revenue was only like in the tens of millions of dollars for the entire United States. You could get it to 100 million if you really tried, but like that was you total domination. Like this idea you could turn regular cars into cabs. That was something like very unique, and that's a difference between East Coast investors and West Coast investors. So.
That is so cool. Cool. And so you realized that you could actually use this in your favor, like that they're very greedy and whatever. And I kind of remembered that you were saying that you did not know how to learn sales, did not know how to do sales, and you started off with like local businesses, which is obviously very hard considering their margins are so thin and you can't guarantee them, right? So how did that happen? How did the sales process go? What did you do to get better at sales and stuff like that?
Yeah, so essentially we just had a discipline where, and this came from Suman, to give him a lot of credit. So he woke up at 9 every morning, or he did. I woke up at 10, and he would get the day ready. We would look at, okay, what are the industries we're calling? We'd find all the companies in those industries. We would start with local businesses, regional businesses, and national businesses, and that would be the order we would go into. We would then figure out where they were located, and then we would go from East Coast to West Coast. So then we would go from 9 a.m. to 6 or 7 p.m., depending on how we felt. We'd take a break for lunch, and it was just like a typical work day, but instead of like doing anything else, all we would do is find people to call and sell to them. And I think during that summer, had probably called close to, between both of us, probably like 1,000 businesses. And we had called so many types of businesses. We had started to learn about the advertising behavior for out of home, which is what this became known as, for approximately 50 different industries, everywhere from, we ended up getting in conversations with the people that lead Coca-Cola's national advertising strategy, all the way to like a restaurant in Back Bay that wanted to invest in. And we knew exactly how much people would be able to pay and what they were looking for. And through this, we ended up realizing like our real customer weren't the actual brands and the local businesses. It was advertising agencies, and those are the people we have to sell to.
So awesome. Okay, cool. And then you guys did that, and then that led to, at one point you said, like, I remember listening to it, that Verizon or was your competitor, and they were trying to get in the space as well. Is that correct?
Verifone, yeah. So
Verifone
is one of the largest payment companies in the world, and they have this group called the Verifone Taxi Media company, and it's a subsidiary. The guy who used to run it at that time, I don't know if he's still there, had a court case against him from his stepdaughter around sexual harassment. So I'm telling you, these people are not great people. And um, he came from that like perspective of like cutthroat, win at all costs, and dominate anyone you can. And so the what they would do is they would just blatantly lie about us. They're like, hey, look, like these guys are out of business. You should sign up with us. They would get really attractive women to hang out at like the body shop and say, hey, this is your receipt. Do you want to sign it? Or, hey, I'd love to take you to dinner if you sign this deal. Or, hey, this is a contract we have for you. You have to sign it. Otherwise, we're not going to release your car for you. And so they did all these tactics to try to win over the company. So the way that the taxi industry worked, we have to sign up taxi medallion owners. And in many cases, the taxi medallion owners have representatives that are the drivers that are renting the medallion themselves. But the challenge is that to get the signature for a lot of these, so the medallion owners technically have to live in the city of Boston or the state of Massachusetts to be authorized owners of the medallion. So that's to avoid this whole problem of like people buying a medallion, using it as rent seeking, and then moving to Florida. Well, people still did that, but they had their representatives in Boston. Well, the challenge is that the person on the books is someone like Randy Smith, and the guy who is the representative is some like cab driver. So you get the cab driver signature, who's actually the legal representative, but they don't have the authority to actually sign on behalf of the medallion owner. So it became this huge cluster that everybody had to figure out. And a lot of these guys are rich, so you have to like track them down in the Bahamas or Florida or Brazil or Mexico or India, wherever they come from. And Montana was also very popular, and so it became this like huge like hustle. And basically, the city of Boston, with Verifone and CMT and us and others, so they're not also, the city of Boston was also not a good faith actor in this whole thing. They were kind of siding with different players in the market, because it was very clear later on that there were kickbacks, and this started to become obvious because the guy who was the taxi director of the city of Boston at the time we were there, he ended up getting fired later on because of corruption. And so they had written basically a regulatory policy around payments that was about 2 sentences, and they had written about 2 paragraphs about what drivers can and can't wear, but about 2 sentences about how payments should be accepted in this cab. And it was so poorly written that if anybody was to execute on the law, you would lose money. I mean, tens of millions of dollars a year. And I remember the exact quote that the taxi director told me. He's like, sometimes you have to learn the idea of lost leader in business. And what he didn't realize, your lost leader can't be your main business unless you're a Silicon Valley company. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And so actually, how does like 19-year-olds going after these big companies in this crazy industry, like I'm also like doing sales, which is not these, first of all, like 19-year-olds, you don't have a lot of skills, but also like, adding on to that, like, like you were doing a computer science, right, which is such a introverted field, and sales so extroverted, right? How do you, and you're probably facing rejection like a lot every day. How do you keep on going and like not get like, not get like scared or like, like just like lose hope, I guess?
So to be honest, all of that happened. I lost faith. I was really scared. Like for the first few calls that I was making, I couldn't even get words out. Like there was times I called people and hung up. It was really, really pathetic. And what happened is like I would just watch my co-founder make calls. I would take exactly what he said and I would say it back to people. And then people would ask me a follow-up question, and I would be like, I don't know, and then I'd hang up. It happened like that for maybe a week or two. I was like incredibly bad. But the thing was that having a co-founder that was fairly confident, having a co-founder that was also in it with you at the same time, and being able to be in the same place and doing that together really allowed me to break out and to then call people and to understand what happened. And the fact that we made it a habit, like every day, regardless of what happened, we had to make these calls. And at some point, we would have these, we would get lunch and we check in, like, how many calls did you have? How many calls did you have? And at some point I realized, like, I'm losing this competition. Like, even though we're all trying to get the same thing, like, he would have 20 calls under his belt by the time we went to lunch, and I was at like two or one, or I sometimes couldn't even call. And so, it was just getting to a point where I was starting to I realized, like, I'm more competitive than I'm shy. And so I ended up starting to call and starting to get myself back on track. And it just turned out, like, I asked, like, we were, at that time, he used to smoke weed and I used to drink, like, you know, just to, like, get the edge off on some days that were really, really hard. And and it wasn't like when people are in the 40s doing it. We were like really like in college. It was like Jameson and, like, whatever. And so um, uh, what happened is I asked him, like, how do you deal with all this rejection? And he's like, at the end of the day, look, we just have to do what we can this summer. And, if we put everything on the line and we still don't make it work, then we did whatever we could to make this happen. And there's not, like, we can't fault ourselves for not putting everything we could. And that time it was kind of a turning moment for me. It was just like, look, like, that's true. Like, if we did everything we can and it's still not going to happen, then there's no regret. And so that changed a lot for me after that conversation. And that's what I realized. Like, if I put everything I want into this, and and that changed my conversation too, because people on the other end started to recognize that. And I started to become more honest with people. It's like, hey, look, like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I can tell you why I'm excited about this company. And they got excited about it. And what a lot of people, I think, when you're younger, you look up to older, you know, business people or politicians or whatever, and like, wow, they have everything figured out. I think 2020 has kind of dispelled that view for a lot of young people. But really, at the end of the day, no one knows what they're doing. And people really want to work with people that care, because so many people hate what they do. So if you're on the call, you're excited, you're interesting, they'll just take that call. And even if they say no, I've had people say, hey, like, I love your enthusiasm so much. This is not a good fit for us, but I'll make introductions and I'd like to be an advisor to you. And that's how we ended up getting into the advertising agency world.
So cool. I completely can relate to that. Enthusiasm is so contagious in the sense that, like, people just want to be a part. Because if you're happy and you're excited, they're like, what am I not seeing here? Why are they so either you're so crazy and you're so stupid. Like, that's happened with us. So we're like when we were applying for YC, they were like, either these guys are really stupid or we're not seeing something here. One of those two. Like, why are they so excited about it? Turns out we were stupid, which is different, but we still got it. You know.
That's exactly right.
Cool. And it's so. At what point, like, you actually, before we go further, I want to kind of ask you this, because sales is such an important skill. Now that you did it while you were young, obviously that muscle grew and you got better and better at it. Like, what is your advice to people, like, who try to, like, shy away from sales, or, like, should they do it? Like, how important is it as a skill?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of really great ways to build businesses, right? And just because you're not good at a certain type of sales, which is, we were doing, you call people and they respond to you, and it's a very, like, in-person kind of thing. So we would visit people in person. We would also make phone calls, and I can tell you, every time we did an in-person, we got rejected. So that didn't work for us in that business. But you can do emails, you can do text messages, you can sell to friends, you can sell to family, you can sell to friends of friends, you can sell to strangers. It really depends on your comfort level. And a lot of what people think about sales is what they see on the movies, right? Like, you're on this call, you're like a high pressure situation, you're getting the person and you're going to twist their arm and they're going to say yes. It'll be this, like, pivotal moment in the movie, and then there's a montage, and you make millions of dollars.
Like Wolf of
Usually,
like Wolf of Wall Street,
yeah,
basically. Yeah.
yeah, Wolf of Wall Street in like boiler rooms. There's
Yeah.
a lot of these things like Glengarry Glen Ross. Like there's all these like scenes you see, and it's just like very like hard struggle to be a salesperson. Really, like sales is it should be something that you enjoy. Like if you can start to build an empathy with your customer. And I like what Suhail says this. Like if you can become friends from Mixpanel, and now he does Mighty, the browser. He's like, if you can become friends with your customers, you'll have a really fun time. And that's when it started getting fun for us. Like, don't worry about making the sale. Like, worry about, can you start building a relationship with this person? Because initially, what I'll tell you is your product is going to suck a lot, and your understanding of the market is going to be nothing. And your ability to communicate your product is going to be laughable. But what it will stay is your relationship. And the number of relationships I made from AMP Idea that allowed us to get through some of these like very difficult times is really what allowed us to live another day. So.
I love that, and I also think that's interesting is that the fact that like it's such a even for people who don't want to do it, like nobody likes sales when they start, right? It's uncomfortable. It's rejection is so weird, but I feel like just doing and like kind of like it's like problem solving. Like the more you do, the better you get. The muscle develops, and then you kind of feel this when you close one client, you feel this crazy amount of confidence. You're like, okay, maybe like you feel good about yourself, and it's this crazy adrenaline rush, right? And I think it also like helps with different parts in different things, right? Like it's such a interesting one because I know what you mean. I used to be really bad at sales too, and I think I probably still am a little bit, but I feel like it just gives me that confidence to like just be like going and not caring about rejection.
Rejection is something we want to avoid, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
want to go into a situation whether you're asking somebody to go on a date or whether you're trying to ask somebody for money. I mean, at the end of the day, rejection sucks, and no matter how good of salesperson you are, like I now have friends who are the top salespeople in any company they walk into, and even them, like rejection stings a lot. Like that's why they're good. Don't worry, like that feeling stays with everybody, but like really don't go into it in the beginning thinking like you're going to make money off of this. Just go into it and say, hey, I need to learn. And honestly, if you're building a company, you have a fairly good reason to understand the market is going in some direction, or you have a product that's really good. And so really talk about that. Like, don't worry about, will this person be convinced? Worry more about, can I talk to this person, and can this person also share my level of excitement? And more often than not, that answer is yes. What they will say no to is giving you whatever amount of money you're asking for. So.
Yeah, fair. Cool. And so from there, you ended up selling that company, correct? Like the first company?
Yeah, we sold it to Verifone during the recession, so it was like an economic free fall. So it was an okay sale, but
Yeah.
it was more just to have like some pocket money in college. So.
That's a good amount of pocket money to have in college.
It
um,
was it wasn't an incredible sale. Yeah, it was an asset sale, but
yeah,
we ended up making some money on it.
but we're 19. Everything is an incredible sale. Come on.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The fact that
um,
we were successful.
fact that you have an acquisition, right? Um, cool. Before I want to talk about the next company because it got crazier and more amazing and amazing as you went for like the vision got bigger and bigger. I kind of want to ask a few questions about until now. So one thing that I thought was pretty interesting, and I listened for your podcast, and you said right now like like how your co-founder was talking like wanted to start because he wanted to prove it to the girl, right? And I feel like I have been there. When I did my first startup, I started because same reason. I thought it will help me get women, right? Just and it's weird looking back at it. Like out of curiosity, why do you think? And I've thought about this a lot. Why do you think people take such a twisted approach to solving the actual problem? Like why I should go build a startup to help with this? Like this is like
Um, Honestly, it's because of the romanticization. But really, what I thought about was, look, like at the time I was dating somebody, and I really, really liked her, and we, the startup for me mostly became a way for me to prove to myself that I can make something happen. But really, like what I thought, and it's obviously, going back, it's really funny, is that you by doing something cool and doing something different, it lets you stand out from the crowd, and you'll be able to impress people. It turns out at that time, everyone thought that being an entrepreneur was the same as being unemployed, which is true. And no one wants to be with someone without money. And so, to your point, it was fairly backwards logic. You could just ask people. And also, when you try to impress people with things that are not you, you come off as like kind of
insecure, and
arrogant,
yeah, yeah,
arrogant and weird and stuff.
yeah. Nice. Okay, makes sense. And so, how has that reasoning evolved over time? Like you've done, like after like your first startup, like which was again such a hard industry to be in. From there, you went to autonomous cars, and now you're doing like with killer whales and stuff like that. So, which we'll talk about more. But like, how did that reasoning evolved into like what should you be doing, or why are you doing it?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like every company has a different motivation in my life, and so the same thing happens for people outside. Like the first one was just to prove it, and now it's more of uh, the opportunity to work on problems have that are that I'm intellectually curious about, but also will have an impact in the world. And you know this from being in the Valley and also being in YC, is you can get money to do anything. It's just that if you're not intrinsically interested in what you're trying to do, you will just stop working
Yep.
on it. And so now my motivation is there's a huge, very valuable problem we have to solve around climate change, and there's a huge important problem we have to solve around governance of how we manage the way corporations are being run, and they're actually the same problem, but you just have to create a structure or an organization in a way so you can capture the value while also making that impact. And it is harder than it looks or it sounds, but it is incredibly awesome when it starts to work. So.
So amazing. And so how did you so actually two questions. One is like, for someone to be able to do that, do they need to have some kind of like, they fear the security, or like, they need some kind of money to be able to like, survive, or like, obviously in general, startups are hard and you need that kind of to be able to get into that. But like going with the mindset of impact and, is that something that is easier once you have something like you have some kind of savings or whatever you want to call that, or or like doesn't matter?
No, I do think that you should keep yourself economically secure, because building a company when you're near the last dollar, and like, I mean, once you start growing older, like, you can't just, I mean, you can, but it's harder to just abdicate on your responsibilities, especially if you have a family, or if you have, maybe it's not even kids, but you might have to take care of your parents or whatever the case is. These are real struggles, and now we're in a pandemic. Like, these things are only going to get exacerbated. And I have really close family friends that they've lost somebody, or they've gone through a divorce or break. I mean, these are really big deals, and so find a way to keep yourself economically secure, emotionally secure, and then use, like, as you start to see the business start to be sustainable, then you can start taking larger and larger personal risks. If you're really young and you're in college, you don't already have a job, you already don't have anything that you're responsible for, so go and try a bunch of stuff out, like build a bunch of companies, build a bunch of projects. Like, one of my mentors told me, like, never build a startup, just build a project. If it starts making money, then you can call it a business. But he's like, a startup is really like a clever way of telling people you have a project that hasn't worked out yet. So.
It's awesome. It's a good, interesting point. Um, and so now looking at it, like, if you could do it all over again, how would like, let's say you're in college right now, how would you approach this? The type of industry you would work, like type of startup you would work. I mean, as you said, like you're probably going to try a bunch of different things just for fun and like not. My guess is that correct, or?
Yeah, I just do it the same way we did. I think that was the best experience I've ever had. Companies after that were not nearly as fun because I took them way too seriously from the beginning.
Yeah.
And what I would say is just have fun. Like you're working with friends on something that's really interesting that you personally like to work on, and instead of thinking about, hey, how can I turn this into something that's going to make lots and lots of money, think about it from a perspective of how can I do something where I can get a few people to really, really love it. And if you can do that, trust me, no matter how hard it gets, those people, whether they're customers or they're advisors or whatever, will keep you going. Like they won't let you die. And there's a reason for that is when people really love something, and you can see this from the story of Airbnb or DoorDash or whatever, like, and they're $100 billion companies now, their companies didn't make sense to very many people, but to the
Yep.
people it did, they will do whatever it takes to keep you alive.
That's so cool. Cool. Awesome. So let's go back. So you sold the company, and then what happened next?
So I went back to college because I had to finish up.
Okay.
Sumant went back to college because he had to finish up. We
Indian parents?
graduated.
Indian parents problem?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we both had. Yeah, I actually failed at college because my main thing was I wanted to drop out, but
Yeah.
I ended up graduating. So to me, that ended up becoming the failure condition, and my mom was incredibly happy, but I
Yeah.
was very disappointed I actually graduated, and so it was a very weird and bizarre conversation. But
Love it.
uh, uh, so in any case, my so I ended up working for a little bit, and then I started getting to the next company. And the way I did the next company is I ended up building a startup to build a startup because I wanted to do that. I ended up wanting to build self-driving cars. That turned into like a logistics play. That ended up turning into what Shotput became in Y Combinator. But really, that was a lot less enjoyable. And the reason was I wanted to build a company because I had built a startup in the past, and it was just something I had to do because I was a startup guy. And I ended up finding a college friend who I wasn't particularly close to, but he also wanted to build a startup, and it was a very different kind of thing. Like just to build a startup for the sake of it, and I'm sure you've met people who have done
Yep.
this. It is a gruel. Like everyone hates it. I mean, I had my co-founders leave. I had
Yep.
investors try to get money back from me. I had people who were like incredibly upset with me all the time. I had customers who would call in irate. Like we had some of the. It was an experience, and I can say that was definitely the initial motivation was like, can we build interesting technology for self-driving cars? What it ended up becoming was let's just build a startup because that's all we know how to do. And I would say don't do that. So that's not good.
I can totally relate to that. I've been there, and I know exactly what you mean. Um, awesome. And then what happened after that? Like did it end up failing, and then you ended up moving on, or like what happened with that startup?
Yeah, so we ended up getting some really big customers. We got Wall Street Journal, Red Bull, Samsung, etc. But no matter, and we were YC, we'd raised a ton of money. We were doing what I had always wanted to do. I was living the dream I had when I first started my first company, but it was a nightmare. And the reason it was a nightmare is because I wanted to build a company where we were working on complex technology to change like the way cars operate and the way things work. I ended up getting talked into building a logistics company and working with all these different customers and like building this path for like large enterprise sales, and it was all of the things I didn't want to do. I was building an enterprise sales team as somebody who doesn't traditionally think that you should have a sales driven company. Like I think you should have a tech product focused company. And there's nothing wrong with sales driven companies. You have incredibly large businesses built that way. But to me, it's a product led company. And where I was and what I was doing was incongruent. And so it wasn't so much that we stopped succeeding. It's I just wanted us to fail. And once you want yourself to fail, everything starts to become harder. Like every difficult conversation you have to have with employees starts to become like a drag. Even walking into the office went from, whoa, this is cool, we're going to do something interesting, becomes like, shit, I have a job now. And like
Yep.
every conversation with investors becomes harder. every time you sit down with someone, like, hey, how's it going? You're just like, I wish it wasn't. And that's a real thing a lot of people experience. And at that point, one of my friends was like, you need to do something else. Like even your best case scenario, you're like, we were at that time we were trending to do to break even in like 18 months, but like I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so I instinctively, like, we should have been focusing on sales, and I was getting everyone to focus on like finding a new market where we could even be bigger. And it was just like, it was just because I stopped caring about what we were doing and I wanted to do anything else. And when you want to do anything else, like my employees came up to me and were like, hey, look, like we're on a path to like really being something interesting now. And I was like, yeah, let's just do something else. And when the CEO says that, it's like, it's the beginning of the end.
Yeah. Like you said, the enthusiasm is such an important thing, right? And if it felt like you lost the enthusiasm.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what happened.
So what happened after that?
I ended up going to LA, helping another company. We basically had worked out something where, they were about 6 weeks from bankruptcy, helped them turn around, raise money for them. I said, I'll help out for a year and then like try to do something new. And then after the year was up, kind of decided like, hey, I've done as much as I can for this company. I've gotten what I wanted. They've gotten what they've wanted. And so they were on a path, like they're still operating today. They're still doing really well. So, they ended up getting venture capital, they ended up getting debt capital, they ended up building a team for them, ended up transitioning them from a logistics company to a fintech company. And then I realized like I really want to understand like what's happening in the world of the climate change. And more importantly, like I've seen this a lot, I'm sure you've seen this a lot, companies who start off on the good intentions, but then like they go public or whatever, and then they become like incredibly like hazardous companies in society. And so I was like, I really want to uncover this problem, and then let's see where we can go there. And then now today I'm helping a company called LTSE work through some of these challenges, and I'm also in the same vein helping my understanding like what are the challenges here, and then understanding like how can I build a company here that is going to do something interesting.
And I want to ask this question for myself, right? Because I was chatting to someone about this, about the impact part, and I felt like, like for me, I'm a very analytical person. I think very big picture, and I think I've heard you say in the past, and I agree with that, like where you gotta like look into the day to day and like not look at the end goal in a sense, right? Because then if you focus on that and not enjoying the day to day, an end goal is never as fun as it sounds like, right? But for me, every time I think about impact, and every time I think about, I want to work on this particular, or I want to work on this thing, which would be really cool to help, or whatever, or even for myself, I feel like because the end goal, especially like changing, example in this case, in your case, when you were talking about like working on like environmental stuff and changing the thing, it's so far away, and it's only one piece of probably the bigger problem, right? How do you keep motivated and like that just like just doing that and like just having fun with that one small piece, rather than like I wish everything was this way, like how do you keep motivated in that one small piece, knowing that it would not be the be all end all?
For me, and this is different for every single founder, for me, it's working with a partner that is equally committed to success. And the reason I say that is because there is no person in this world that you can show me that is going to be 100% so committed to the idea day in and day out that when things go wrong, that they're not going to feel some level of self-doubt or some level of what am I doing? But so there's the main way I keep motivated is I work with really, really interesting people. But the other way is that, look, like at the end of the day, you're right. Like when you work on these like really large challenges and you don't see yourself getting closer, and you know that there's this like part of you that you're like, what else could I be doing? What you really have to think about is that, and that's why it's important to like start getting early customers that love you, because then you can go back to them and you can look at what they're doing with your product, and you're really making a difference right now. When you're looking at like, hey, can I change the way that like corporate governance works, like LTSE, that's like Eric restarted, like that. This has been a 7-year journey. we asked him like, what kept you going? And at the end of the day, what he said is like, the thing that matters to me is that we're still making progress. And they've had tons of setbacks. Like when you listen to the overall like narrative, like where they went to and the rejection and everything happening, ultimately it was just like he had a really good group of people who loved what they were doing. He had experience as a startup founder where he knew that this is something that keeps coming up. And the last thing is that he had a core group of people that were like, dude, just pursuing this and is going to make a difference. And the closer and closer you get is going to change the way society and capital markets function. And that's why you need your company is never what you're building. It's the people you surround yourself with, whether it's founders or customers or advisors or investors. It is never the actual thing you're working on. It is who and how you do it. Everything else is just is imagination and fiction, whether it's called vision or whatever. And when you buy into that fiction too much, it's like believing you're Harry Potter and you want to be a wizard, right? Like no matter how much you read about him, you'll never become him. It's a fiction. But to create, and all companies are really fiction that you're trying to realize. To do this really well, you also need other people that buy into that fiction.
So I heard you say, and talking about this concept of progress, I heard you say, like, the difference between delusion and vision is execution. Like, if you aren't executing or making progress, then maybe you aren't the person to do it, right? And just kind of keeping on this tangent, like, some entrepreneurs give up too early and then some waste years. How do you know how do you make that decision if there is enough progress or there isn't?
As I say, as we were talking about before, right? The main challenge is that you're trying to make something not real become real, or something that's fiction to reality. And the reason why it's delusional if you're not making consistent progress towards it is because you're just believing this fiction without actually trying to realize it, right? Like you see a lot of people fall trapped to it. A lot of people talk about like, how do you know something is true? And to me, it's true if you can organize people around it and you can commit action towards it. And that's what every startup founder does. You build a team, which is organized people, and then you get consent around this worldview, and then you have to build towards it, which is your execution. And the way you make sure you're building in the progress and you're actually making real gains towards it is that slowly and surely you are able to either use a product or bring customers into this product and see them get value out of it. Like, let's just take a quick example, right? There's people who believe the earth is flat, so they've organized a community around it. But there's nothing that they can act on with that information, right? We've abandoned that worldview a long time ago. So in their context, it's true. The world is flat. Like as far as they can see, everything, it works. But as soon as you want to build SpaceX, that thing has to be destroyed. And SpaceX took a long time before they had their first launch. But think about that every single day. They were moving forward to a rocket existing. And before SpaceX even started, Elon Musk found somebody who built a rocket engine in their garage. That's not even possible. So what was the first thing they thought of? Well, why don't we just take it to the desert and see what happens? Let's see it let's just see it rip. And that is still progress. You're testing out whether or not this is a viable next step. If that rocket engine didn't actually function the way that it was intended to, that SpaceX could not have existed. I mean, I'm not saying one way or the other, but the point is at every stage, you're committing time and money towards your the business or the product you're trying to build. Make sure that you're testing that risk around it. Is it, let's say you want to build, or I'm trying to do stuff around climate change. First thing I did is see, are there people interested in this? So I created a meetup group. The next thing it was, how long can people stay committed? So we had 50 people in the first meeting. That dropped down to 4 after 4 meetings, right? And then it just every week we met up and we learned about AI, we learned about different things. Then I was like, well, can we get a data set? So I talked to a friend, he introduced me to somebody, he's a leading shark researcher in the world. We got data from that. And at every stage, something's happening. Now, is it perfect? No. For like 3 months this year, we did nothing. But the point is that we keep moving forward. We keep having some goal. We keep trying to accomplish it. And that's really the only thing you can ask for. So.
Love it. I love the iterative approach to solving the problems, right? And so I see, and I think I heard you talk about this before as well. Like, so is it like you have a goal in mind and you're trying to like reverse engineer it and breaking down into parts, and then kind of focus at one piece at a time and moving towards that?
You have something you want to accomplish, but then there's something that you need to validate before that can happen. So, for example, for the thing that we're doing now, the eventual goal is to be able to talk to dolphins and have a world that we can protect, 70% of the oceans and with, government and military help. But that's like, from where we are today, that's impossible to fathom. Like, that's a world that is not just delusional, it's not even in the purview of most people. But
Right.
there is a small subset of people who are interested in this. At the end of the day, what we're creating is a social contract. So first we have to do is, can we get anyone interested? And once you get people interested, then how do you keep them committed? And there are groups like Global Fishing Watch that are using technology with Google Maps and satellite and nonprofit organizations to get the data science. And they're actually ensuring that fishermen in the international waters are actually applying the international law and then the law of the sovereign nation that they're in the waters of. And they're selling that to nation states to ensure that there's this, enforcement that's occurring. Now, the same thing for us is that what we're looking at is, can we build AI tools or tools using neural networks to study the behavior of animals? And can we then take that and then make it useful to this shark researcher? And as of date, we've done stuff that the researchers have found useful, but they have not incorporated it into their own analysis. So we have to keep working until our product is useful for their analysis. And we first start with like very simple thing. Can we take shark positions and fishing vessel positions and ensure that there's not any level of interaction? That is as far away from being able to govern the oceans and talk to dolphins as you can get. But you want to prove out small little things. And that's not just so you can, build relationships, and not just because, but you have to build confidence in yourself, have confidence from the team, and also be able to say, okay, once we get this part done, can we then build on top of it, or can we build the skills to do something more interesting in the future? And so, just because you're working on something unrelated to your ultimate goal today, at least build up the skills so you can eventually do what you want.
Do you apply the same iterative approach to your personal life too?
Uh, I I'll tell you that when I
Yeah,
first started dating in LA, I did that, and it made it a lot easier. It is hard to do that consistently, though. I'll tell you that I've fallen off a lot. So
interesting.
yes and no.
It's actually pretty interesting because I'm actually applying the same approach to fitness right now. I just started like going to the gym, and I'm like, well, can I take that startup like funnel approach and like iterative funnel and apply to my fitness life? So I'm like legit. I'm like, okay, I need to gain weight by if I can gain 1 pound a week. Looking at the data and what mostly people gain, they have this much calories, and I'm like, okay, if I need to gain in the next 3 months, like I'm just like my KPI is just like how much weight I'm gaining. So looking at that, and I'm like every week I'm like tracking that. I'm like, is it going up or no? Well, eating like relatively healthy, but the goal being just like that is the goal. And I'm like, can I reverse engineer that? And like, what do I need to do? What one thing I need to add just to like make it 1% better? And so the compound like just compounds basically. So like it's simple as that because I'm trying to gain weight and I would not be able to. Like last week I added one more avocado. I'm like, okay, just that 300 calories, and some more nuts. And I'm like, okay, well next week can I? And it's such an interesting way to do about it, but it's just like it's fun. It's a game at this point. It's not even I'm not even thinking about the weight part. I'm just having fun with it. I'm like, oh, what if I add one more thing? And what if I add one more thing? And what happens? That's why I was curious. Like, do
So
you do that?
so you nailed it, and that's exactly why iterative processes work. And I'll tell you what happened before. So I was trying to go after the big goal, right? And I was like, I'm going to take on this whole challenge and of the ocean, and I'm going to try to do it all myself, and I'm going to like find all these people. Even after all this experience, and even after going through all these startups and iterating and realizing. And again, like what ended up happening is I overwhelmed myself. I ended up spending like weeks not doing anything. I ended up trying to like work with people that like were excited about the big vision, but had no clue how you're going to do the little steps. And then eventually I was like, this is no longer fun, to your
Yeah.
point. And now
Yeah.
it's like, okay, let's get back to reality. Let's start like little by little, and let's just have fun here, right? Let's just like build up our skills. And I actually came out because I wanted to learn how neural networks work. There's fast AI courses I wanted to go through, and so I was just like, every week, let's just get through part of a lesson. And then it turned out that this girl I was talking to also wanted to do the same thing. And so it became this interesting dynamic where it wasn't just me trying to tackle this whole thing. It's like, oh, why don't we kind of learn together? Why don't we? And so that blossomed into a relationship. And so, and then I got some other people interested. And so little by little, what you realize is that that makes it fun for not you, but everybody. So,
So I
yeah. No,
love
it's
this.
exactly.
I
You
like it.
nailed it.
I want to end this with like just because the podcast is about YC. So how important was YC for you, and like that experience, and like how would you recommend and stuff like that?
I mean, changed my entire life. I think I would still be doing startups and everything, but the ability to be part of a network like meeting you and being able to understand how more closely like what it means to work in this like high pace environment of that pressure cooker YC. I mean, it's everything. Plus, having the ability to fall back on that brand,
Yeah.
it's huge.
Yeah, I would add on to that point what you said before, and I didn't understand this up until like probably 4 or 5 years ago, but I think I really understand it now, or it's like 4 or 5 years when I was in YC. Is the what you said before? It's like it's at the end of the day, it's about people, right? And it's like first it was all about I want to build my company and I want all about that, and now it's more about no, it's not actually. It's like I want to talk to amazing people and build those amazing relationships because that's at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? Um, for me, that's
Yeah, I
been
thought
really
the
cool.
same thing. I think I thought the exact same way. I mean, everything I'm talking about is because I've made the other mistake. So.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, I want to end this with a few quick fire 1 to 2 sentences questions. So we'll start with one unconventional slash thinking outside the box kind of things you guys did in your business.
For shot put or
For
for
any business you've done, which was like pretty amazing, which is like pretty outside the box.
oh yeah, when we were doing the taxi cab company, we needed to get to places where taxi cab drivers hang out. So we rode in the back of a car going into the airport waiting area, and we were always told that we couldn't do it. But we just told them that like we're dropping off something for our uncle, or we are doing a school project, and we were 19 at the time, so we just let us go.
Like it. Advice for someone applying to YC.
Apply as early as you can, and take the rejection or take the acceptance, because at the end of the day, like what you're going to do is this, the process of going through the application will refine your ability to understand your business really well. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, just do startup school. But honestly, that application alone is huge in helping you understand yourself.
Advice for someone starting their first startup.
Really care about what you're doing. Uh, if you do, you'll be unstoppable.
Cool. If there was one thing that people could take away, something that has helped you in your life a lot, what would that be?
Oh, surround yourself with incredibly uh, talented people, and you can do that a lot easier on the internet these days. Just talk to people who are on the same path as you are.
Awesome. And final question: any books or blogs that inspired you?
Paul Graham's essays, and then in terms of management, Peter Drucker, and in terms of storytelling, Joseph Campbell.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. This was amazing.
Absolutely, I really loved this whole podcast.
Cheers. Thanks, man.